Sylvester Stallone had never expected to receive a letter, or anything like it, from the Vatican. Yet just days after the world mourned the passing of Pope Francis, a letter arrived at the doorstep of his Beverly Hills home, and it would change the course of his life in a way he could never have imagined. Some journeys are written long before we realize we are meant to take them. It was a slow, overcast morning in Los Angeles, the kind of morning when the city, usually noisy and alive with ambition, seemed to move just a little more quietly. Sly sat in his private study, a cup of black coffee gone cold beside him, idly scrolling through the morning news on his tablet. Every headline flashed the same solemn message: Pope Francis dead at 88. A deep sigh escaped his chest, heavier than he had expected. Though they came from vastly different worlds, Stallone had always admired the man for his simplicity, his steadfast humility, and his fierce, unwavering compassion. They had met once, many years ago, briefly and formally, during a charity gala in New York. But it wasn't the handshake that stayed with him. It was the Pope's eyes, kind, weathered, utterly free of judgment. Sly set the tablet down, rubbed his face with his calloused hands, and let silence fill the large room. Outside, the Pacific mist rolled in from the coast, blurring the horizon. He had no plans for the day. His next film was in post-production. His daughters were grown, building lives of their own. For the first time in a long while, time felt loose and unfamiliar around him, unsettling in its quiet. That's when the doorbell rang. A single chime, sharp and unexpected. His security team usually screened all visitors, and deliveries never came to the main entrance. Curious but cautious, Sly rose slowly, his joints cracking as he crossed the polished wooden floor. Maria, his longtime housekeeper, peered down the hallway. "It's for you, Mr. Stallone. Special delivery," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and formality. At the front door stood a man in a dark overcoat, holding a heavy cream-colored envelope, sealed with golden wax. The Vatican's insignia was unmistakable, even from a distance. "For Mr. Sylvester Stallone," the courier said simply, offering the envelope with both hands, before retreating silently down the drive. Sly stood there, the envelope heavy in his palm, suddenly feeling like a boy staring at something too important to touch. He carried it back to the study, setting it gently on his desk as if it might shatter. For several minutes, he just stared at it, emotions rising and falling inside him, none of them clear enough to name. Finally, with careful fingers, he broke the wax seal and unfolded a thick sheet of paper. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, but there was a sense of urgency in it too, as if every letter had been shaped with deep purpose. At the top, plain as day, was the signature, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. The date made him flinch. April 26, 2025, 3 days after the world had said goodbye to him. Faith is the bridge, and compassion is the footsteps across it. I have watched you, Sylvester. Beyond the screens, beyond the scripts, I have seen the man who understands that the greatest battles are not fought with fists, but with perseverance and kindness. There is a place not far from where your story began, a place that needs something now. You will know what to do. Seek out Father Vincent in Philadelphia. Sly exhaled a shaky breath, his body folding into the nearest chair without thinking. The letter rested heavily across his lap. He read it again, slower this time, the words wrapping around him like an invisible thread pulling him toward a place he hadn't thought of in decades. Philadelphia, South Philly, the beginning. He hadn't properly walked those streets in years, not since sneaking into a quiet charity event where nobody had recognized him. He was Rocky Balboa to the world, a fighter, a symbol of heart against all odds. But to himself, he was still the scrappy kid who once sold his dog to make rent. And now, somehow, the Pope had seen that too. He muttered to himself, "Why me?" There were thousands more deserving, the priests, the volunteers, the teachers, the doctors, real heroes. Not an aging actor with sore knees and a long list of regrets. Yet deep down, something stirred. He stood up with new resolve, clutching the letter tightly as if it might vanish. Within 2 hours, he had canceled his meetings for the week, waved off his personal assistant with a vague "something came up," and booked the earliest flight available to Philadelphia. When he landed, he went straight to St. Anthony's Parish. Inside the church, dimly lit by shafts of afternoon light filtering through stained glass, Sly spotted an elderly man, adjusting hymnals at the back of the nave. As Stallone approached, the man turned, a round face, thin white hair, kind eyes set deep in tanned skin. "You must be Mr. Stallone," the man said, his voice soft but sure. Sly nodded, showing the letter briefly. No further explanation was needed. "Come," the man said, motioning toward a side door. They crossed into a smaller annex where children's drawings, yellowed by time, still clung stubbornly to the walls. Folding chairs were stacked in a corner. A battered punching bag, stitched and patched, hung from a ceiling beam. In the far corner, a heavy desk sagged under piles of books and an old, cracked coffee maker. "This," the man said, introducing himself as Father Vincent, was the Pope's refuge when he visited Philadelphia. Quiet, anonymous. He would sit right there, he pointed to a sagging folding chair, listening to kids, mostly street kids, not to preach, just to listen. Stallone moved slowly through the room, the soles of his boots scraping softly against the worn floor. There was a familiarity here, something aching, almost beautiful. On the desk, Father Vincent pulled out a thick notebook, its edges worn thin. "He left this," Vincent said, "for the one who would understand." Sly opened the notebook carefully. The pages were filled with rough sketches of boxing rings, playgrounds, notes about building trust, stories of children no one else had bothered to see. Near the end, in the familiar, careful hand, a final note. "If Sylvester arrives, give him this. He will know." Sly closed the notebook slowly, his throat too tight to speak. The Pope hadn't just seen the man Stallone had become. He had seen the boy he had never stopped being. Quietly, Stallone looked up at Father Vincent. His voice, when it came, was rough and low. "What do you need from me?" Father Vincent smiled, small and tired. "Nothing," he said, "except what you've carried all along, your heart." Stallone nodded once, firmly. The journey wasn't ending. It was only just beginning. The next morning, Sylvester Stallone woke in a modest guest room above the church hall, sunlight slicing through faded curtains. He stretched stiffly, his joints protesting like old hinges, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then he saw the notebook resting on the nightstand and remembered. Downstairs, the small kitchen bustled with simple life. Father Vincent brewed coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. They sat at a battered table covered with newspaper, sipping in comfortable silence. No media, no schedule, no handlers buzzing through earpieces. Just two old men, a pot of coffee, and the heavy knowledge that something needed to be rebuilt. Vincent finally broke the silence, his voice still carrying that calm certainty. "The place is called The Haven," he said. "Started small, just a couple of volunteers and a dream to keep kids out of trouble. You know how it goes. Things that matter don't come with big budgets." Sly nodded slowly. He knew exactly how it went. He had lived it once, scraping dreams together with duct tape and stubbornness. Vincent continued, explaining how the neighborhood had changed. Drugs, gangs, and poverty had crept back into the cracks. The city council had pulled funding years ago. Donations dried up when the Pope's personal visits ended. Now the roof leaked. The gym equipment was rusted beyond use, and the after-school programs had been reduced to a few tired souls fighting a battle with nothing but their bare hands. It wasn't a glamorous cause. It wasn't the kind that drew gala dinners or headline sponsorships. It was the kind of quiet work that barely registered beyond the block it saved. Sly sat back, the coffee mug warm between his hands. Every part of him wanted to say yes immediately. But another part, the wounded, weary part, wondered if he had anything left to give. He was no longer the indestructible figure Hollywood had crafted. His body bore the scars of 1,000 real and staged battles. His spirit, too, had been battered in ways no critic or fan could ever see. "You don't have to decide today," Vincent said, reading him perfectly. "Maybe just take a look." Later that day, Sly walked the few short blocks to the Haven. The building sat wedged between a vacant lot and a boarded-up bakery. Its brick facade was cracked, the windows grimy. A faded hand-painted sign hung above the door, the H in Haven nearly peeled off completely. Inside, the smell of old sweat, mildew, and determination hit him immediately. A handful of teenagers lounged in mismatched chairs, thumbing their phones or tossing a frayed football back and forth. An older woman at a folding table flipped through worksheets, her hair pulled into a weary bun. When Stallone entered, a few heads turned briefly, curiosity flickering and fading almost instantly. No one recognized him. To them, he was just another guy in a cap and jacket, another adult maybe here to tell them how they were screwing up. Somehow, that anonymity felt fitting. He wandered through the building, past a battered boxing ring with sagging ropes, past a library where the shelves held more dust than books, past a kitchen barely big enough for two people to move around without bumping elbows. Everywhere he looked, he saw not just what was broken, but what had once been dreamed into existence. A safe place, a second chance, a quiet rebellion against the streets, waiting just outside. When he returned to St. Anthony's that evening, he found Father Vincent repairing a cracked pew with wood glue and stubbornness. Sly leaned against the doorway, watching for a long moment before speaking. "You were right," he said simply. Vincent looked up with a half smile, like a man who had waited a long time to hear those words. "I'll help," Stallone said, "but no cameras, no headlines, no Rocky Balboa saves the day." Vincent chuckled dryly. "The kids don't need Rocky. They need you." That night, Sly pulled out his old black notebook, the one he carried through every project, and began scribbling ideas, not just for renovations or new equipment, but for something bigger. Boxing classes, yes, but also literacy programs, music lessons, job training, a mural wall where kids could paint their dreams in colors that wouldn't fade. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into the work quietly and methodically. He called in favors, tapped into his network discreetly. Old friends in construction, old trainers from the gyms of his youth, even a few fellow actors who were willing to help with no credit or glory. Materials arrived without fanfare. Lumber, weights, punching bags, paint, new kitchen appliances. Local businesses, once skeptical, began donating sandwiches, uniforms, even textbooks. Every evening, Stallone visited the Haven, blending into the background, rolling up sleeves, hammering nails, lifting broken beams. The kids began to notice, curiosity giving way to cautious respect. They didn't know him as a movie star. They knew him as the guy who stayed late fixing the basketball hoop, the guy who showed one of them how to throw a real jab without throwing out his shoulder. One Saturday, a boy named Marcus, tough and wiry, cornered Stallone near the lockers. "You used to fight or something?" he asked, chin tilted up, half defiant. Sly smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, "I fought." Marcus nodded like that, explained everything. He shuffled his feet, trying to sound casual. "Maybe you could show us some stuff. You know, real fighting, not stupid street stuff." Sly nodded again, slower this time. "First rule," he said, leaning in, voice low but steady. "The best fighters know how not to fight." Marcus frowned, then smirked. "Sounds lame." Stallone laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Yeah, maybe, but it's the truth." Word spread fast. Before long, a small group of teenagers started showing up after school, not just to hang out, but to learn. Sly ran impromptu classes, basics of boxing, strength exercises, using nothing but their body weight, simple breathing techniques for managing anger. But it wasn't just about punches. He taught discipline, patience, respect. He taught them that falling down wasn't failure. Giving up was. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Haven began to pulse with new energy. The walls echoed with laughter. The gym floor vibrated with the thudding rhythm of jump ropes. The kitchen smelled of spaghetti dinners, cooked by rotating volunteers. One evening, after an exhausting day rebuilding the rec room, Sly sat on the stoop outside the Haven, watching the sunset bleed gold and crimson over the rooftops. Father Vincent joined him, handing over 2 cold root beers. They clinked bottles wordlessly. "You know," Vincent said after a while, "the Pope told me once, the real saints aren't in cathedrals. They're in places like this. They're the ones who show up when it's messy and hard and nobody notices." Sly stared out across the street, where Marcus and a few other boys played a ragged game of basketball under a crooked hoop. His voice was rough when he finally answered. "He noticed," he said. "Even from 1,000 miles away, he noticed." And somehow, that thought made the burden feel a little lighter. Weeks turned into months, and the Haven slowly transformed. The cracked windows were replaced. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances. The gym once again echoed with the smack of gloves against pads. A fresh mural stretched across the main wall, a brilliant explosion of colors showing kids climbing ladders, throwing basketballs, holding books and musical instruments high against a sky bursting with stars. The word hope arched above them in bold letters, stitched together by the careful brushstrokes of the very hands it was meant to save. Sylvester Stallone remained a quiet force behind it all, declining every invitation to make a public statement, refusing every journalist who caught wind of the project. "It's not about me," he said simply when pressed. "It's about them." To the kids, he was Mr. Sly now, the guy who could still throw a jab that snapped the air like a whip, who listened more than he talked. To Father Vincent, he had become something rarer, a man who honored a calling not with words, but with work. One chilly afternoon in late fall, Father Vincent summoned Sly to the little office behind the church. The old priest looked more tired than usual, thinner somehow, his skin papery against the light. He offered Sly a seat, then slid a small package across the battered desk. "He asked me to give you this if the day came when you truly understood," Vincent said, his voice quieter than normal. Sly frowned slightly, picking up the package, carefully unwrapping the simple cloth covering. Inside was a letter, different from the formal one that had summoned him months ago. This one was written on plain lined paper, the ink slightly smudged, as if it had been carried in a pocket for a long time before being set down. "Dear Sylvester, if you are reading this, then you have seen what words alone cannot explain. You have felt the pull of the invisible battles fought in forgotten streets. You have understood that saving one life is worth more than saving face. You have built a bridge without applause, and in doing so, you have kept the flame alive. Remember this always. Fame is a loud noise that fades. Kindness is a quiet seed that grows long after we are gone. Be the gardener, not the trumpet." There was no signature needed. Sly sat for a long time after reading it, the letter trembling slightly between his thick fingers. He thought about the flashing bulbs, the screaming crowds, the endless awards nights, where faces blurred and words felt hollow. None of it had ever filled him the way this battered building, these stubborn kids, these tired but shining faces did. He folded the letter carefully, tucked it inside his jacket pocket over his heart, and when he looked up, Father Vincent was smiling at him with a gentleness that said more than any blessing could. That winter, as snow dusted the streets of Philadelphia, the Haven held its first official reopening. There was no press release, no red carpet, just a simple block party organized by the neighborhood, with homemade banners, potluck dishes lined up on folding tables, kids running wild in new sneakers donated by local businesses. The laughter echoed down the alleys, bouncing off brick and hope. Sly stood at the edge of the crowd, hands stuffed in the pockets of his leather jacket, watching. A few of the kids spotted him and charged over, dragging him into a pickup basketball game where he promptly embarrassed himself, slipping on the ice and landing flat on his back to uproarious laughter. He laughed too, harder than he had in years, lying there in the freezing slush, looking up at a sky darkening into brilliant navy blue. As months turned into a year, the Haven didn't just survive, it thrived. Former troublemakers became mentors for younger kids. Local police officers stopped by to play ball instead of making arrests. Teachers volunteered weekend reading lessons. Churches and mosques and synagogues alike chipped in, ignoring walls that once divided them. Nobody cared what background you came from once you stepped through those doors. You belonged. Hope had taken root, messy and defiant and real. Sly continued visiting, though less frequently now, trusting the hands he'd helped strengthen to carry the mission forward. He made sure repairs were funded quietly, that supplies kept arriving without fanfare. He sent anonymous Christmas gifts, sturdy backpacks for school, fresh coats for winter. He stayed out of the spotlight but remained in their hearts. When he wasn't there, the mural on the gym wall stood in his place, a reminder of what stubborn, silent faith could build. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, sitting alone in his Beverly Hills home, Stallone would take out the Pope's second letter, read it again slowly, and feel grounded in a way No trophy, no marquee, no bank account had ever given him. Years later, after Father Vincent passed peacefully in his sleep, Sly returned to Philadelphia for the small funeral. The church was filled with familiar faces, kids now grown, volunteers, neighbors, people whose lives had been bent and healed within those modest brick walls. After the service, they gathered in the gym at the Haven. The mural, still vibrant, seemed almost to glow under the soft winter light. Marcus, now taller and broader than Stallone himself, stood at a makeshift podium and spoke. "Father Vincent once told me," he said, voice steady, "that real heroes don't wear capes. They just show up, over and over, even when nobody's looking." His gaze found Sly in the back of the room. "Thank you for showing up." Later that night, Sly sat alone on the stoop outside the Haven. The familiar creak of the wood beneath him, a root beer balanced loosely in his hand. Snowflakes floated down in lazy spirals. He looked across the street at the dim streetlights, the cracked sidewalks, the leaning buildings. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And sometimes that was enough. His mind drifted back to that very first letter, to the words that had set all this in motion. "Be the gardener, not the trumpet." He smiled, a small private thing. No one would write headlines about what they built here. There would be no monuments. But in the laughter echoing from the gym, in the dreams scribbled in crayon and paint across those walls, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of something lasting. Spring came early that year. The Haven planted a small garden beside the gym, tomatoes and sunflowers poking stubbornly through the cracked earth. One afternoon, as Sly helped an eager group of kids build raised beds out of old pallets, a young girl with curly hair tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Sly," she said, holding up a crayon drawing, "this is you." The picture was simple, childish, but unmistakable. A man holding a watering can, standing in front of a bridge made of bricks and books and basketballs. Above it floated one word, hope. Sly chuckled, wiping a hand roughly across his face to hide the sting in his eyes. "That's the best portrait anyone's ever made of me," he said. As twilight settled over the city, the kids lit paper lanterns and sent them drifting into the sky, each one carrying a wish, a prayer, a silent thank you. Sly watched them rise, tiny beacons of stubborn, fearless hope, disappearing into the vastness above. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. He had the Haven, and that was enough. And somewhere, he'd like to believe, the Pope was smiling too.